Welcome to Elevated Healthy, where we bringing you content for your conscience that makes much sense. I am your host, Elevated Healthy. Before we get started, we just gonna jam out for a little minute, man. We're gonna get started. All right, let's go. Bring y'all in, man.
Very much appreciated. Shout out. Get your money,
greatest
players.
hits.
Play your
Get
rates.
it. Queens out
We
there
talking
getting
greatest
money.
hits.
Spanish Harlem.
We talking greatest hits.
Baby, I love you.
We talking greatest hits.
Natural woman. Now play that song.
This is that spectacle. Mesmerized. Told them that I set up my business and
Franchised.
Air fries.
Air
Yeah,
fries.
smoothie. Yeah, lay it down. Got tiles on the ground. Foundational. Create this right here, inspirational.
Imagination.
Check it off. Topic of the Richter scale. I shake it like that, man, until I make bill.
Trimmer.
Adjudicated.
Adjudicated.
Cognizance.
Personal.
I speak that prosec.
Prosec.
Never guilty.
Never guilty.
Man, filthy clean, man, with a lot of what things that I claim over the years, man, shit.
Full of blood, sweat, and tears.
You already
Know it, poet.
How we destroying the opposition. With this composition. I'm in the transition. But I make it happen. I fix my transmission. Now I tell everybody, man,
Boom,
start
start
the
your
engine.
engine.
Room operator, yeah, hit you on the
Matinee.
with my young chocolate thing.
How we sway.
It's all good, compatible shit. We'll take it to the next
Lateral.
Just moving
Forward.
You already showing potential.
Potential.
Keep it going, man. The network, keep it going. Everything else is coincidental. When you find yourself, man, in pressure situations.
Cool,
Calm, collector is the alliteration.
That's the alliteration.
Yeah, man, shit. You know it's paper chasing. Man, we call that conditioning. Yeah, mentally, man.
Mentally.
Gotta know how to position your thoughts so you can reach up in your vaults.
Say
Yeah,
a penny.
then made a million.
Made a million.
That's exponential, man.
Exponential.
Drilling. Hey, that's how we make the killing these days. I ain't talking about
Nah,
going
not
around,
kidding,
hit
not
my
kidding.
brother up with AKs.
I'm talking about
a thousand. Yeah, man, striking them out like this. Wowing the whole world. How we do it, man, you know. This is that spirit, and you know it's congruent. So, man, we ain't running. We just dilapidated right now. We're building ourselves up so we can surround the whole neighborhood with this positivity. Yeah, man, shit, this is magnetic. Attracted to it, man, shit's prophetic. No 27, man, yeah, on the diuretic.
Thank y'all for
That's
listening.
energy drink. I'm on a different
Thank
link.
y'all for
Don't
listening.
blink, man. Eyes open.
I said thank y'all for listening.
Yeah, for the nosy ones.
Let's get it going. Let's get it going. Let's get it going. The Massacre of Black Wall Street, written by Natalie Chang and illustration by ClaytonHenry and colorist Marcelo Maiolo. In 1921, white rioters destroyed a beacon of black prosperity and security. They killed as many as 300 black Tulsans, left thousands homeless, and ransacked an entire neighborhood. At the time, there was no prosecutions of the instigators. Almost a century later, there has been no reparations. This is what happened and why it still matters today. Brought to you by Rethink Original Watchmen on HBO. This is all true. In 1921, about 11,000 black residents lived in the neighborhood of Greenwood, north of the Frisco Railroad tracks in Tulsa. It was self contained and self sufficient. Black owned grocery stores, banks, libraries, hotels, movie theaters, and more lined the neighborhood's main thoroughfare, Greenwood Avenue. It was a thriving commercial district, and as much as it could be, it was also a safe place. This is true as well. In the period from 1911 to 1921, 23 black Oklahomans were lynched by white mobs. As part of the Jim Crow South, Tulsa was highly segregated, its black voters suppressed, and black residents scapegoated. A sense of frontier lawlessness lingered across the state. In Tulsa, a vigilante group calling themselves the Knights of Liberty had for years been ambushing and forcibly exiling anyone that they considered a radical. In 1920, a mob of hundreds of white Tulsans stormed the county courthouses to take a White House prisoner in their own hands. To take a white prisoner in their own hands. They lynched him that night, facing almost no interference from the police. In the following days, Tulsa police chief called the lynching of real benefit to Tulsa in the vicinity. Greenwood residents knew this to be true. If the Tulsa police were not going to protect white residents, no one was going to protect black Tulsans. The events depicted below, to the knowledge of historians and survivors, are all true. They comprise one of the worst instances of mass racial violence in American history. And keep reading after the graphics to learn more about what happened next. The Watchmen series on HBO opens with a scene set in 20th century Tulsa. It's based on real history, and we've depicted it in more detail below. Dialogue is based on primary accounts of the events. In 1921, Tulsa was on knife's edge. Most of the city's 10,000 black residents lived and worked in the prosperous, beautiful district of Greenwood. Some people called it Black Wall Street. It was self contained and self sustaining. Black residents owned the houses, banks, stores, restaurants, and theaters. It was a thriving neighborhood, an American success story. But not everyone in Tulsa felt that way. The KKK was putting down roots throughout the city. Mob justice was on the rise. Lynchings were coming, and the police were often nowhere to be found. On the morning of May 30th, a few seconds in a building in downtown Tulsa brought all of those intentions to a head. Two teenagers, a black shoe shiner named Dick Rowland and a white elevator operator named Sarah Page, crossed paths in this elevator. The most common explanation is that Rowland just stepped on Page's foot after the doors closed. Page cried out, and it brought a nearby clerk running. No one knows what Page told the police, but whatever she said, the police didn't think it was worth investigating until the next day. And Rowland, a black man, alone with a white woman, knew what white Tulsans would think. May 31st, the day everything went up in flames. The police, one black officer and one white, went to Rowland's house to bring him in. We are going to lynch that Negro, that black devil who assaulted that girl. An hour later, the death threat started. Nab Negro girl for attacking girl in an elevator. The afternoon edition of the Tulsa Tribune, featuring an inflammatory headline, was released at 3 p.m. When the calls began, the sheriff and his deputies barricaded Rowley in a cell in the county courthouse. But the narrative of the Tulsa massacre was going to have very little to do with that cell. Word had spread throughout Tulsa that Rowland was in danger. Black Tulsans gathered at the Dreamland Theater, the pride and joy of Greenwood. 24 hours later, it would be rubble. We're not going to let this happen. We're going to go downtown and stop this lynching. The police hadn't stopped lynchings before. Black Greenwood residents figured that the only solution was to take matters into their own hands. Black Tulsans went to the courthouse to offer help to the deputies protecting Rowland, and the mob was not pleased. A white Tulsan reached for a black Tulsan's gun and started a struggle. The shot that resulted might have been an accident, but the hundreds that followed it over the next 24 hours were not. Pow, 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 bing, pow, 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 to the whites at the courthouse, the errant shot was permission to unleash the rage that had been building for hours. But really, this was a rage that had been burning as long as wealthy, thriving Greenwood had been in Tulsa. Pow, 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 pow. That night, the white mob burned Black Wall Street to the ground. White Tulsans, who were deputized in Massacre just hours earlier, arrested 6,000 black residents that night, holding them in makeshift confinement camps for weeks. By noon, June 1, white rioters had burned down 35 city blocks in Greenwood, dozens of black owned businesses that had anchored the neighborhood, hundreds of homes, and half a dozen churches. 10,000 Greenwood residents were left homeless. 15 years of black wealth and self sufficiency were raised in one night. In the aftermath, the Tulsa City Commission passed fire ordinances that blocked the rebuilding of Greenwood. So many of Tulsa's black residents had no choice but to just leave. Most of the victims of the massacre were piled into unmarked graves and buried. And for decades after what happened that night was buried too. 100 to 300 Greenwood residents killed. 9,000 Greenwood residents left homeless. 1,200 Greenwood buildings destroyed. 50 to $100 million in property damage. If you bury something long enough, it can become very difficult to unearth. Dr. Scott Ellsworth is a professor of Afro American and African Studies at the University of Michigan and author of Death in a Promised Land, the first comprehensive history of the Tulsa Massacre. He was also one of the lead scholars for the Tulsa Race Riot Commission and a key player in the battle to secure reparations for survivors. According to him, the lasting trauma of the massacre is also intrinsically tied to the silencing of survivors. For 50 years, the story was actively suppressed in Tulsa, and it was deliberately kept out of white newspapers. The people who brought it up were threatened with their jobs. They were threatened with their lives, he says. The story of the massacres indicts white America, which is why it was buried for so long. Without the perseverance and openness of the survivors of the riot, he says, there will be no mainstream acknowledgement of what happened in 1921. Many Tulsans are just happy people are talking about the massacre at all, as Dr. Alicia Odewale, assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Tulsa. Odewale is currently working on research project called Mapping Historical Trauma in Tulsa from 1921 to 2021 that reanalyzes historical evidence to visualize what happened to Greenwood during the massacre and in the years that followed it. 98 years later, almost all of the massacre survivors have passed on, and it's up to the descendants and the people left alive today to carry on that legacy. As of 2019, the city of Tulsa has yet to award reparations to the families of survivors and victims of the massacre. The total estimated financial loss, taking into account the destruction of both private residential property and property in the business district, would be about 50 to $100 million in today's currency. Odewale says the neighborhood, in addition to being subjected to the on ground assault, was bombed from above by planes carrying white assailants. As an adult, as an added insult, it took almost a full century for the search for the mass graves of victims to begin in earnest. They are currently ongoing. If we discover the remains of victims, are able to identify them, and if those people are reburied with honors, that will be a huge moment for the city, says Ellsworth. But it'll be a moment for the country too. White people remember history differently than African Americans do. And the reality is that we have one common history. There's only one American history. And until we are able to confront the bad parts as well as the good parts, we're never going to be on the same page on how we view the country, its promises, its problems, Ellsworth says. We still have a lot of work to do in Tulsa. There is no question. There is still a lot of hurt and anger over this. The hurt remains in part because of what happened after the fires burned out. In the days that followed the massacre, insurance companies refused to reimburse the damage done to Greenwood since riots were not covered. As a result, in the weeks that followed the massacre, many of the Tulsa black residents were forced to languish in the makeshift holding areas that had been taken to the night or leave the city and the community that they built all together. The accumulation of a massive amount of wealth and the loss of income that would have been earned had Greenwood been allowed to thrive undisturbed is almost incalculable, says Odewale. But just as important are the things that can un- be quantified, such as the loss of the sense of safety in their own city, the loss of trust in city officials, law enforcement, and in some cases in people altogether. This isn't to say that Greenwood was defeated. Over the next couple of years, almost every destroyed home was rebuilt. In 1925, the National Negro Business League hosted its annual conference in the neighborhood, signaling the revival of Greenwood as a hub for black businesses and entrepreneurship. The following decades brought commerce and culture back onto Greenwood Avenue. And more recently, the city had made commercial investments into revitalizing the area. But for many longtime Greenwood residents, revitalization is not reconciliation. In fact, revitalization can often be a code word for gentrification that prices and pushes out community institutions, especially those owned by black residents. At its worst, it might be a form of erasure. Some sources have theorized that the massacre was a calculated attempt by the city to seize the land, one that has taken on a new contemporary form. Modern day gentrification and urban renewal projects, more commonly referred to in North Tulsa as urban removal, continue to try to gobble up what is left of Greenwood, Odewale says, adding that those renewal efforts aren't targeted to those who they should be. The quality indicators released by the city of Tulsa every year continue to demonstrate that North Tulsans and South Tulsans are living completely different lives in what seems like two different cities. Unfortunately, black citizens in North Tulsa fall to the bottom of every metric. It took 80 years for the city to release an official report on the massacre, which recommended multiple forms of restitution, including financial reparations for survivors and their families. Calls for their reparations have been dismissed at multiple levels of the justice system, including the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not sure any amount of money or social services offered 98 years later can make up for the massacre, Odewale says. I'm in awe of how resilient the North Tulsa community continues to be as efforts to rebuild and revitalize the Greenwood district have been ongoing since 1921. But at the very least, in my opinion, we need to have a serious plan for reparations. Free housing and business support for descendants' families. Greenwood business grants, college tuition scholarship for young students, in North Tulsa in a serious effort to close the median income gap between white and black families in Tulsa. Odawale's incisive perspective on the ways racial traumas of the past evolve and take form in the present and prescient for an entire country rife with incidents of white on black violence, like the CDY riots in Detroit in 1943, which mostly took its toll on Paradise Valley, a black neighborhood. It helps illuminate truths about the relationship between segregation and law enforcement, land loss and land robbery, gentrification, and history. What should Greenwood and Tulsa look like today? We might start to answer that question by seeing what it looked like in the spring of 1921. All right, thank y'all for listening to this comic slash reading. Hope y'all like it. And like, share, and subscribe, man. I'm out.